Welcome to You Decide. I'm your host, Errol Lewis. And before we get started on this episode, I have a special announcement to make. Listeners of You Decide may remember that toward the end of the year, we do these documentaries where we look at historical figures of the past. So we did an audio documentary last year on New York political icon John Lindsay, the former mayor of New York City. The year before that, Mario Cuomo. We did a 3-part series on him. And then a few years earlier before that, we really got the ball rolling when we did a 3-part documentary on the life and legacy of Mayor David Dinkins. This year, we're going to turn our attention to former Congresswoman Bella Abzug. She was very active in what's called the second wave feminist movement. And here's a little bit of what our documentary is going to sound like.
Even if they didn't agree with her, they liked her. And many of them were afraid of her.
She was a lightning rod for controversy.
Mr. Mayor, I wanted to offer you my resignation.
They called her Battling Bella, and her signature line said it all. This woman's place is in the House of Representatives. From 1971 to 1977, Bella Abzug, the lifelong New Yorker, made that true, serving 3 terms in Congress, fighting relentlessly for women's rights, and helping to lead the effort to impeach President Nixon.
Because of the killing of the spirit and the meaning and the belief of American democracy, that I do impeach the President of the United States.
Abzug kicked the door open for women in New York politics while making a lasting impression on many New York politicians. In addition to her work in Congress, she was a lawyer, social activist, and a leader in the women's movement, which comes as no surprise from someone famous for wearing many hats. In this special 2-part podcast edition of You Decide from Spectrum News New York 1, we will explore Abzug's impact on New York City and the nation. Through conversations with elected officials, staffers, biographers, journalists, activists, admirers, and critics, the series will tell the story of Abzug's years of activism, her terms in Congress, and her leading roles with the 1977 National Women's Conference and President Carter's National Advisory Commission for Women. We'll also try to uncover why Abzug isn't more of a household name, despite all of her many accomplishments. This special audio-only edition of You Decide will be out next week, wherever you get your podcasts. But this week, we're going to talk about another woman in New York politics who's very important, and that, of course, is Governor Kathy Hochul. She took office on August 24th, 2021. That happened to be my birthday, strange birthday present, after Andrew Cuomo resigned. That was the day he left office amid a series of sexual harassment allegations. She then ran in the 2022 election against Republican Lee Zeldin, who centered his campaign on public safety. Kathy Hochul did win that race, but it was by the narrowest New York gubernatorial election margin since 1994. So now we've got big news this week as well. Bruce Blakeman, the Nassau County executive, has announced that he too is going to run for governor. So the field is actually getting somewhat crowded. He's heading now for a Republican primary challenge against Representative Elise Stefanik from upstate. Her upstate district in Congress is where we mostly know her from, but she's also been actively involved as somebody who is close to Donald Trump. We're going to get into all of that as we look ahead to 2026. We all want to know what to expect. And to answer the question, I've got 2 of the best people, the people who I literally would just talk to, except now we've got the cameras going, minus the profanity. Our own New York 1 statehouse reporter, Bernadette Hogan, is here. And Politico's Albany bureau chief, Nick Reisman, also here. Welcome to you both.
Thanks for having us.
Right off the bat, what are the big stories in statewide politics that we should be watching next year?
So Governor Kathy Hochul's relationship with Mayor-elect Zohran Mamdani, that triangle relationship with President Donald Trump, how much Hochul is pressured by, the left-leaning end by her Lieutenant Governor, Antonio Delgado, but that is not the main focal point, right? It'll be what pressures the governor has to deal with when it comes to the feds and with Mamdani and how that affects the relationship with the legislature.
Is that what you're going to be watching as well?
Yeah, I think the strategy that we're going to have to look for with Governor Hochul is how she's going to be able to navigate this relationship with Zohran Mamdani, the incoming New York City mayor, simply because, when you look at polling, Mamdani is highly controversial in the suburbs. And Hochul needs the suburbs in order to win re-election. Now, a Republican obviously has a much steeper hill to climb than Hochul does, I think it's fair to say. But Hochul is going to need Long Island, and she's going to need the Hudson Valley.
Right.
And Mamdani is deeply unpopular in parts of Long Island. So how is she going to be able to kind of go out there and say, all right, Mr. Mayor, you're going to get this aspect of your agenda, maybe something like universal child care, but we're not going to do something like the free bus service that you proposed during the campaign. So it is going to have to be this very, very delicate balancing act because the politics are really going to be driving the policy, I think, going forward.
So let's frame the politics broadly speaking, the way it usually goes, and then I want to talk about some policy with you about what's going to actually have to get done for New Yorkers. Generally speaking, the formula for Democrats and the reason they've held the statehouse, I guess, since 2002, or that election, 2003, for the last quarter century now, almost a generation, is that they win in the cities, right? They run up huge numbers downstate, including in the suburbs, or they do pretty well in the suburbs, as well as, say, Buffalo, Syracuse, Rochester. And the rest of it goes red, right? So you've kind of got a formula where it's going to be downstate plus upstate cities versus the whole rest of the state. Is that a sort of a fair way to put it?
Right, except now you also have this weirdness where people have moved out of the city ever since the pandemic, right? That's why for example, Hudson Valley congressional district that Mike Lawler represents, that's why he was told by the White House, don't run because you're one of the only Republicans that can keep and retain this seat. Because so many people have moved out. And the politics, it has slightly changed, but at the same time, the governor has to work on connecting herself to some of those policies, like, saying she made things more affordable, did a child care tax credit, did the phone ban. Are people connecting her with that, and how does that assist her?
Right. And Long Island is really the bellwether here, right? I mean, and that is why, for a lot of Republicans, especially in Nassau County, why Nassau County Executive Bruce Blakeman's candidacy for governor is so intriguing. Right. Yes, it is a shot from half court right now to win the governor's race as a Republican.
Right.
You have to essentially depress the turnout in New York City. You have to have sufficient turnout in upstate New York, run those numbers up big as a Republican, and then really, really win the suburban counties. That's really difficult to do. But if you're a Republican, say, running down ballot as a county legislator or a town supervisor or a county legislator, you're going to have to make sure that you've got a strong top of the ticket next year. By the way, all those local elections, they're going to be in even-numbered years outside of New York City going forward. So Republicans would like to see a strong suburban candidate in some instances. And that's why Blakeman potentially has some wind at his back going forward. And it's why Hochul needs to be so careful about not alienating the suburbs, a part of the state that she really hasn't been able to make many inroads with over the last couple of years.
Right, and off of that, if you look at the Tom Suozzi special election, I mean, Hochul was non-existent before that, and as Suozzi was campaigning. They didn't want her on Long Island because she wasn't good. That's, talking to the strategist there. She wasn't good for those races. And with the Blakeman entry, already talking to some of these Republicans on Long Island, they're really excited to have somebody that, number one, is one of their own, but then could also possibly pose a challenge to the Democrats that are holding on to their congressional seats by really thin margins. So all politics is local. And the governor, again, the favorability ratings and the name ID, it's lower than she'd like in New York City. It's lower than she'd like on Long Island. And she's trying to parse or figure out the situation that Mamdani was able to figure out policy-wise, but then also just connecting younger voters, people that are online a lot. So maybe not just younger voters, but I'm just thinking back to this Forest Hills Stadium event that Mamdani was at, that Hochul also got on stage at. And she was nearly booed off stage to chants of tax the rich. And, talking to one of her people, they said, well, listen, we kind of wanted to test the waters and see what it would be like to get her in front of a crowd that she normally wouldn't be able to get in front of.
I remember that. And she said, I hear you. She didn't say, I agree with you.
Yeah.
She didn't say, I yield to you. Or she didn't say, let's talk. She's like, I hear you. And that's about it. Well, so before we go any deeper into the politics, we've spent so much time talking about the mayor's race down here in New York City, because that's what we were supposed to do. But let's talk something about the sort of the statewide politics politics. And this is perfect. You're the Albany bureau chief. You've got a ton of experience in upstate. You have a lot of family upstate. You're a sort of a quasi-upstater yourself in a lot of ways, or you know what's going on up there. But, I mean, what are the economic challenges? Because every 4 years when the governor's race comes around, we're right back to the same thing. And I check in on the numbers that I like to look at around, loss of population, how are the industries doing, what are the investment opportunities and so forth, what are the industries that are doing well, and it always looked pretty bad. But what's the question up there that Governor Kathy Hochul, who herself being from Buffalo, is in fact an upstater. What does she have to deal with?
I'll tell you the big wrinkle this time around. It's like, yeah, sure, depopulation remains an ongoing concern, but the tariff war that Trump has launched against Canada is a major issue for some of these border communities, by the way, which includes Erie County and the city of Buffalo, where Hochul is from, and where there are a lot of voters who live.
Niagara Falls, right?
And you've got a number of concerns from people who live in these communities who do a lot of international trade. Some of them even work in Canada for their day jobs. They've got family in Canada, but there's a lot of cross-border trade that goes on with our neighbor to the north. And the American tariffs on Canada have created a significant problem for a lot of these communities. Just take tourism, for example. In Elise Stefanik's own house district, a lot of Canadians come down and spend time in the Adirondack Park, for instance. If you're in the Adirondacks in the summertime, half the license plates are from Quebec. And half the people on the trails are speaking French. But that is less and less the case now because of this tariff fight that Trump launched. And so I would not be surprised if we see Hochul going forward in the election to make that a major component of her pitch to upstate New Yorkers, especially in these rural communities that might be predisposed to voting for Trump, to voting for a Republican, to try and take a second look and say, well, look, if you're a farmer, you are not benefiting from this tariff war that the president launched.
Right. The other thing is jobs. I mean, hey, Nick's employed, so that's good. But
Yes, it is.
God. But, you have the problem where young people grow up in these cities, say Syracuse, for example, where my family's from, but then they all leave. I mean, they go down to the city, or they just can't get competitive salaries, or they're able to work remotely, but for, say, a law firm in New York City paying city wages. It's a really big problem. I think it's the economy, right? You go an hour outside of New York City, you go up to Orange County, or I'm going on my way up to visit my family towards Albany. I mean, it's like Appalachia. It's impoverished. And the economic development question and the money that's gone to some of these towns, like, clearly you don't really see it. You have some outliers like Saratoga County, right? But even Albany County, I mean, the state rather, put forth a couple $100 million to drive some economic benefits. And, you're not really seeing it. I mean, crime will be an issue for Hochul, but again, I think it's jobs and the economy. And the big question will be, okay, you talk about affordability, but like, it's not connecting.
Well, here's what's interesting, because every 4 years, again, we go to the Republican convention, we go to the Democratic convention, and the Republican convention, they list a lot of these things, the depopulation, and they blame it on the Democrats, which is fair, because Democrats are in power. But then I'm waiting to hear what the alternative is, right? And it's like, slash taxes. Well, we've done that. There was a point where Andrew Cuomo said, if you go on a SUNY campus, your taxes will be zero.
Tax-free New York.
The investors,
Startup New York.
The investors stayed away in droves, right?
Right.
I mean, it's not that. You're not going to tax your way out of this situation.
No, and it's also like, Nick can probably speak more about this, but like the cost of just doing business in New York, like the unions, right? I mean, it's more prevalent in New York City, but like it's very expensive to open a business. All the regulations. I mean, there's often the parallelisms between like going across the border over to Pennsylvania, where it's, one could argue the economies are roughly similar, but it's not as heavily regulated. There's just like a lot of laws and like cumbersome aspects there.
And the one thing that they have been trying to take advantage of over the last couple of decades now is this kind of large-scale industrial policy coming from the federal government. If, say, the federal government decides we're going to spend a lot of money on chip manufacturing, well, then let's build a chip manufacturing plant in Clay, New York, outside of Syracuse. Or let's do a big tax credit program for constructing solar panels in Buffalo. Right. By the way, that was in Elon Musk.
That was a boondoggle, right.
But then you run into ideological issues, right? Because that costs a lot of energy, which is anti a lot of the energy goals. The climate law of 2019, I mean, you want to do a chip manufacturing company,
Right.
or you want to do, say, for example, like Chobani, right, in Utica or outside of Utica.
The yogurt maker, yeah.
Which, to make it completely green or not reliant on dirty fossil fuels, it would cost the company an arm and a leg. I mean, it wouldn't even be worth doing business.
Right. There are certain fights that have been ongoing for a while now in the Finger Lakes region over the construction of data centers, which take a lot of energy, and I will not be able for the life of me to explain it, but the cryptocurrency firms that are using a lot of energy as well.
Yeah, no, they've bought power plants they could have exclusive use of the energy, either for a data center or for their cryptocurrency, sort of
like Bitcoin mining or whatever they call it. But yes, it requires a tremendous amount of energy, and a lot of these smaller communities are up in arms over this. And it's nothing is replacing Kodak. Kodak in Rochester, the Rochester area, was a major manufacturer. That was a company town. The Democrat and Chronicle on bonus day, that was the newspaper there, or is the newspaper there. On bonus day, Kodak would, give everybody a bonus and big advertisements or spend your bonus money here. That's all gone. That money is not coming back. That manufacturing in upstate New York is not coming back. And they have not figured out, like, quite frankly, a lot of this country has not figured out what's next, post-manufacturing.
So Governor Hochul has got that challenge, and then she's got sort of another challenge on top of it, which is that, as we've reported, I know you've reported this too, there are major federal cuts that are coming down that are going to hit New York, right? And we're talking about everything from SNAP benefits to support for health care for the frontline hospitals. There's going to be some really tough budgets ahead, probably starting next year, right?
Yeah. I mean, like Medicaid, right?
Right. We're talking about a $3 billion hit, and they're still trying to find cash in the state budget about what's ultimately going to be impacted here. So, they're getting better tax revenue than they expected. They always kind of conservatively, this is the division of budget, always kind of conservatively estimates how much tax money is actually going to be coming in. So it's a happy surprise when it turns out we've got more. That's just good financial planning. And in this case, because of the bull market on Wall Street, by the way, New York gets the bulk of its tax money from the financial industry. Because of the bull market on Wall Street, thanks in large part to the tech stocks and to AI, Wall Street has done quite well. We don't know how much longer that's going to last, but New York's fiscal picture, at least for now, is not that bad. The big question, though, is how do you pay for Mamdani's agenda?
Yeah.
And will there be some sort of tax increase either on people, individual taxpayers, this is the personal income tax, or the PIT as they call it in Albany, or will, as Governor Hochul has specifically not ruled out when given the chance multiple times, will they raise the corporate tax rate? Right. And they're really talking about large corporations. Yeah. There's already kind of an argument that's being formulated around the Capitol that, these big companies, they are already avoiding federal taxes. They're already using all sorts of accounting tricks and gimmicks in order to avoid paying federal taxes. This is just a matter of making sure that they, quote unquote, pay their fair share. I think there is going to be a lot of pushback from the business community on something like this. The Partnership for New York City, the incoming president and CEO, is already raising some alarm bells over something like this. The flip side of it is the Mamdani campaign, now transition team, has said, we're just trying to match what New Jersey has. That's their proposal. Of course, New Jersey, as Bern, you're well aware, they do not pay an MTA payroll tax. They don't pay a New York City business tax. Things are really going up a little bit.
We have a whole host of New York City taxes that are already piled on them, so that if they do this so-called modest increase, it's going to be very anti-competitive. But look, where are the legislative leaders in all of this? Are they going to just kind of follow along with Hochul, or are they going to have their own agenda?
Well, they'll always have their own agenda because they always try to pressure point, despite being Democratic-led, and also they're all Democrats. It's never all like a big kumbaya, right? You have two completely separate and powerful chambers, the state Senate, which is smaller, and you have the Assembly, which is larger, both Democratic-controlled. Both of those leaders agree with the tax hikes on the wealthiest of New Yorkers, and they'd probably agree to probably a host of these taxes, like the corporate tax rate. But where you start to have fissures and problems, say, for example, in the Senate, is where the suburban members lie and those in the Hudson Valley that could have a real problem if, say, there's another payroll mobility tax, something that makes it more expensive for them to commute and those businesses. So that's where, you have like maybe a bit of a natural balancing act. But the problem here is if Hochul is now in this three-way with the state, you have the legislature, Hochul, and Mamdani, and the legislature go with Mamdani, it could put a real problem for Hochul politically and give her a bigger fight as she's running for re-election in 2026.
Maybe I'm missing something, but I mean, when I talk with Dean Foulahan, the incoming first deputy mayor, who was a longtime Albany hand, he knows where all of the dollars are, where all the bodies are. May have put a few underground himself.
Yeah.
But what he says is, it's not going to be that hard. And I think he was referring to both the way that you phase it in, especially the early child care, which I think is probably the biggest ticket item. And, he said, we've done this before. Once you set your priorities, and he says the people have spoken, and we do have the money. And it's just reminiscent to me of when early childhood education was proposed by the de Blasio administration, and there was no money, and there's no money, and there's no money. And then Governor Cuomo at the time, he said, I'm going to write you a check for $700 million. Let's do it.
Hogan and Mamdani are in alignment on universal child care. They agree, they want to do this, they want to scale it up. It is going to be a matter of how do you phase it in? How much do you pay these child care workers? How do you find them? How do you do all the nitty-gritty details of something like this? And we're going to have to make it statewide. Is it going to be a 5-year time horizon? Is it going to be 10 years? I mean, these are all questions that they're going to have to figure out, and they're going to have to find money for it. It is phenomenally expensive. It's a recurring expense that's going to be heaped onto the state budget for every year going
but
forward.
Keep in mind, I mean, finding the money doesn't mean you're looking under a piece of paper. It's like, here's
taxes.
the money.
No, we don't print money.
It's also your assumptions. There are hundreds of thousands of parents that are not in the workforce right now because they don't have childcare.
Yeah.
Once they have the childcare, you can, legitimately, and you can have it blessed by the controller if you have to. Say, look, we expect 10, 20, 30,000 new people to come into the workforce, and they're going to be paying taxes. And that sort of changes all of the accounting on it.
One of the things, too, that's interesting is that the state has this big, multi-billion-dollar, I think it's $15 billion is the estimation for a fully phased-in universal child care program. It'll cost more, at least half of that in the city. They're trying to figure out if they can get the business community to weigh in on this and provide, any money, right? Take advantage of tax credits from the federal end, because there was something in the big beautiful bill, but businesses either don't think it's worth it because it doesn't even scrape the surface for the amount of upkeep or building up that they'd have to do. But the state budget office is going to have to work a little smarter here to figure out how they can then save money. So then it looks like, they are being good stewards of the taxpayer dollar.
I mean, $15 billion over, once they start saying, well, this is over 5 years, this is over 10 years, all of the numbers start to sort of look a little bit more reasonable and plausible.
Things become fungible. And yes, to your point, the budget, you can change these projections as they go, and they do this all the time based on, their estimates for what the future financial picture of the state is going to look like. All of that said, piling this money on every year over the next 5-10 years, whatever you want to, call it, it will eventually add up. I mean, the state budget now is I believe over $250 billion. At this point, 252 or
And
so.
when I first started covering, it was 177 when I was a news assistant. I was like, holy.
It's increasing much faster than the rate of inflation, no question about it.
Right, it's insane. And so, but it's like, okay, and then they have reserves, which they can always plug in, but they keep those reserves in case there is a situation, maybe like what we're dealing with now with federal money not coming into the healthcare budget, where they can plug in if they need. But that's one-time money. They need reoccurring revenue, which is why the tax conversation is so easy to talk about.
And why that's so perilous is, and anyone who has covered these budgets will tell you, and they know, the minute there's a recession, the minute that the bottom falls out on Wall Street, then the state budget is really up the creek. Just ask David Patterson from back in the 2008-2009 financial crisis.
Very interesting.
Prematurely ended his governorship.
All right, let's get into the politics of it now. Governor Hochul endorsed Zohran Mamdani for mayor, even as other Democrats, Chuck Schumer comes to mind, were keeping their distance. How is that going to affect her reelection? I noticed that Bruce Blakeman had an image of Mamdani in his announcement ad, as if he was almost as if he was running against him.
Right. Yeah, he has said Democrats and powerful Democrats, leaders in Albany, and it had Mamdani and Hochul. Meanwhile, Mamdani is a backbench state assemblyman in that chamber. But, for Hochul, she's going to have to make the case, maybe like Trump did when he met with Mamdani in the Oval Office, which is, listen, I might agree with some of these things, but I have big disagreements too. And if Hochul can successfully sell that picture, she might be better off in the suburbs, in upstate, where people, whether you're a Republican, an independent, or a moderate Democrat, or even a liberal Democrat, they might be able to swallow that. Hochul will have issues again with agreeing with some of these expensive policies, but then she'll also have problems with the attack that we can all anticipate, which is you're becoming a democratic socialist.
So many Republicans have been saying that, Zohran Mamdani, this is the third term of Bill de Blasio. That would be an absolute disaster for Republicans if he were really the third term of Bill de Blasio. If he's a boring mayor, with all due respect to Bill de Blasio, if he is a boring mayor on par with Bill de Blasio, that is
it's not a good
godsend for Democrats. That is what they are rooting for. They're rooting for a boring mayoralty. And that is, by the way, very possible. Yes, there will be curveballs that are thrown at this new mayor. A blizzard, some sort of horrific event, some sort of disaster. When you're mayor, that always happens, and you get one chance to show that impression to voters about how you handle a crisis like that, and then that impression is set in stone.
Right.
All of that said, if Mamdani is duller than dishwater at the end of the day, then that is a good thing for Democrats, and I think that's something that Kathy Hochul is kind of banking on.
Right, which is why the Trump saying, listen, hey, I would totally live in New York City if I made Mamdani, really threw Republicans into a tizzy, because they were like, oh, well, how do we pitch this now when we're running against Governor Kathy Hochul, and some legitimate arguments that they could make about policy items? They're like, oh shoot, our number one attack has now been nullified by the Republican president, the leader of our party.
And where that all matters is in the suburbs, is trying to convince suburban voters that New York City has somehow overnight been turned into this hellscape because of the new mayoral administration. And look, it very well, that's something that could still work, because when you're a suburban voter, you're not going into the city most of the time. If you're not commuting, you're reading the New York Post, you're watching stuff on the news, and you just kind of automatically assume that violence is so prevalent. And that will be where the Democrats are really going to have to fight it out at those margins. It's why you're seeing Laura Gillen and Tom Suozzi distance themselves so aggressively from Zohran Mamdani.
Right. Let's talk about some of the challengers. We've got three people running for governor now. Let's start with Antonio Delgado, the sitting lieutenant governor. We've never seen this before, but he is running against the governor that put him on the ticket. They gave him the job in the first place. What is his case, and what is his possible path to victory?
His possible path is getting a bunch of the left-leaning groups and getting some support, harnessing maybe some of that energy that Mamdani was able to, which, look, if you compare the two, it's like night and day. Mamdani was making videos on the streets talking to Trump voters. Not saying that Delgado was not doing that, but we're not seeing that. Mamdani was really good at showing and telling. I remember watching some of these videos thinking to myself, is he making us look bad being up there talking to people on Fordham Road? But legitimately, Delgado, he stands with some of these groups at press conferences, but it's right now his name ID, I think, is less than 20% or just at 20%.
I'd be shocked if it's 20.
Exactly. And again, if he's pointing to his record, he keeps pointing to how he won this race in Congress, right? The Hudson Valley seat. And it's true. It was a feat, and he was able to...
He flipped a seat.
He flipped a seat. He bested a wide-ranging primary field, but what did he do in office? Now, one could make the argument as lieutenant governor, it's basically just a no-show job, right? Or it's just a ribbon-cutting job. That's all Kathy Hochul did when she was lieutenant governor. But the difference is, when Kathy Hochul was lieutenant governor, she showed up everywhere. She remembered everyone's name. I have people who say, oh yeah, she said she would show up 6 months later or a year later and be like, how is your whoever doing? Right. You know what I mean? Even as a young reporter, I remember she recalled things I told her about my favorite pizza place, and then we ended up meeting there for our second meeting. She's a really hard worker. I'm not saying Delgado's not, but she was able to make the most in that LG position that Delgado, we've now seen him complaining, and he's been stripped of his duties as lieutenant governor. Right. But I don't know what the path would be.
When you're lieutenant governor, you really don't do anything. It is probably the worst job in state government.
I don't know why we
think
have
about
it.
how
Nice
boring
office.
it must be to be vice president, and then just multiply that by infinity. And that's lieutenant governor's
You're supposed to be the president of the Senate, right? So you can come in.
You can preside over the Senate, but you really don't cast a vote.
No.
And there is a nice office right off the floor of the Capitol, which Delgado still maintains because that's in his capacity as a state Senate officer. But Delgado, there was a Siena poll that came out, I think, last month that had him down 40 points.
Yeah.
That is a massive chasm.
That's a lot.
That's a lot. And Delgado, up until this point, has really not shown that X factor that Mamdani has, even though he is trying to draft off of the Mamdani momentum, if you will.
Yeah.
All of that said, and why I always caveat all of this stuff now is we didn't, Zohran Mamdani was barely a blip on the radar.
People can catch fire.
This time
Yeah,
of year.
exactly right.
People can catch fire very quickly nowadays. The primary is at the end of June. The budget is most likely not going to get done until late April, maybe early May.
Yeah.
So what if, and this is a big what if, I am just speculating here, what if the budget's a mess?
Right.
What if Kathy Hochul
Another
really
congestion
digs
pricing
in
situation.
on something like personal
Yeah.
income taxes?
Yeah.
And then on May Day in Union Square, Zohran Mamdani goes out there and says, and by the way, Kathy Hochul failed us on raising taxes, and I'm endorsing my friend, Lieutenant Governor Antonio Delgado.
Totally.
All of this is speculative, but there's all sorts of crazy stuff that's happening in politics these days. And things
That is
can
not the
really
craziest.
change on a dime, and that is not the craziest scenario that could happen.
not at
so
all.
Yeah.
it's something that I think the Hochul people are keeping in the back of their mind. They know that the real contest ultimately is going to be in a Democratic primary in a very blue state. It's the first real electoral test that she's going to have to face. And so Antonio Delgado, in that sense, does present a threat.
And one thing I'll say quickly on that, going back to 2022, when Hochul was running for her election to a full term, right? She had only just taken over from Andrew Cuomo, and Lee Zeldin was able to capitalize on the crime issue. Lee Zeldin, who had been supporting President Donald Trump, saying the election was unfair and illegal, right? And someone who's from Long Island, all this stuff. I mean, arguably, not even that crazy interesting of a candidate, right? But Hochul couldn't figure out the crime issue. She was talking about abortion. She was bringing up Hillary Clinton, all things that were 20 years prior, not 20 years, 10 years, right?
Right.
But there was an ad, I remember talking about this with Zach, where you had some people who were like, listen, I've been a Democrat my whole life, but anybody but Kathy Hochul. And when you have that mentality where you're like, you know what, this isn't working, let's try someone else, which is what we saw in the mayor's race.
Sure.
There's a clear anti-establishment mood among voters.
Yeah, the Bernie mood.
Right, it's the Bernie mood, it's the Trump mood, and
Trump
that
too,
is, and the
Center will not
universe of
hold.
voters is growing who kind of feel that way at this point. The satisfaction of affordability, you name the issue.
Right.
So is that what Stefanik is running on? Because her ads so far have mostly been about how Governor Hochul is the worst governor in America, right? And she's very eloquent about that, about all the reasons that things are going wrong. I haven't heard much of a program from her about what she plans to do about it, but
That's right. I mean, this is primarily a one-issue platform. Zeldin was basically a one-issue candidate 3 years ago on crime, and now Elise Stefanik is a one-issue candidate on running against Kathy Hochul.
Yeah.
And when you're governor, it's a lot like being mayor. It's an executive job. There are all sorts of things that you propose. You control the budget, essentially, that process. And we are yet to hear from Elise Stefanik. How would you get a state budget through a hostile Democratic-led state legislature?
Right.
There really hasn't. And what would be in that budget? Where would you put the state's dollars and cents?
And that's the problem with the Republicans, where they haven't had a majority in so long, or in the state Senate, they lost their majority, and the way that was partitioned with Andrew Cuomo. So, even if you ask them, who would you hire? Would they even know how to put together a budget, right, at this point? But I think with Elise Stefanik also, she's a sitting member of Congress. She just had a very public fight with Speaker Mike Johnson. It's like this split focus is happening where is she campaigning for governor, or is she campaigning for just
Speaker.
doing her
Right.
job, or speaker, right. Or speaker, which one is it? And, she's appeared on Fox, she's come to New York City and just been in studio on Fox News. She has not come onto New York One, despite having launched the campaign over a month ago, just days after Mamdani won the general election. Bruce Blakeman, the first day he announces, he comes and does a sit down.
Yeah, tell us about that. He's he just issued his video announcement.
Right.
He's in his 70s. I went and looked at it. It's a really interesting launch. Towards the end, again, he's got images of Mamdani.
Yeah.
I watched it with the sound down. It's a way to sort of like try and figure out what part of this is being aimed. What part of this is being aimed at our what part of this is being aimed at our lizard brain, right? And part of it is him standing there with Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, and I thought about this about Stefanik too. I was like, Trump's kind of unpopular, at least down here. Now, maybe in parts of Nassau County, maybe in, most of the state except for that scenario I was talking about before, meaning New York City plus a lot of the upstate cities. But what's he getting at? What's his theory of the case?
So the line that jumped out at me was he said, Bruce Blakeman is a strong leader like Donald Trump. And so when I interviewed him, he made this case. I am the boss of Nassau County. I won in 21 and I just won re-election. I was able to make a case across a purple county to women, to independents, to black voters, to Latino voters, and build and stitch together a coalition. Now, you've got to look at the numbers. But his case is, look, I'm a really good executive and I'm running against an executive. Judge me on what I've been able to do. I haven't raised taxes. I have had this interesting relationship with federal immigration forces, which we could talk about. But he's making this case where, he had a line to me where he said, I want to make New York State as prosperous as Nassau County is, and I want to put money in their pockets, which is the exact line that Hochul says. But it's like the boss meets boss. And so it just sounded like local versus local. Like I felt like we were looking at a New York race.
Yes. And I think what Blakeman was doing in that video, by the way, the Trump reference was 100% more of a Trump reference than Elise Stefanik made in her video when she launched, because she didn't mention Trump at all. And she is far more closely associated with the president than I think Bruce Blakeman is, even though they're,
even though they've known each other forever.
Even though they've known each other for a very long time. But what Blakeman was clearly trying to do in that video was, as Bern alluded to, was make that electability argument to Republicans who are sick and tired of losing every 4 years in these statewide elections. It's been 20 years, as you mentioned, since they have won statewide, and they are really eager to try and reclaim some sort of statewide office again after being shut out of power for so long. So he was talking to Republican primary voters who like Trump, or at least, think Trump is, a strong enough leader, but also here's a guy who can win. He can win over independents and he can win over Democrats. We should support this guy. You mentioned cozying up to Trump. Yes, that is a danger in New York, where Trump is very unpopular and he's becoming increasingly more unpopular.
He's the best way to draw out Democratic voters.
He is the number one motivator for Democratic elected officials and candidates. But when this is kind of like a playoff baseball mentality. You're emptying the bullpen now in the division series so you can get to the pennant series,
right? And then figure it out.
And then you figure it out. You got to win that primary first. So he's really aiming this at primary.
It really is extraordinary. In 2020, you may remember, this is at the height of COVID. People risked their lives to stand on long lines in close proximity to each other in a state that was already going to go Democratic. But that's how badly New York City voters wanted to cast a vote against Donald Trump.
Right.
It's really playing with fire to sort of put Trump in the middle of this campaign. I'm older than both of you, and so I actually remember the 1994 campaign in which George Pataki unseated Mario Cuomo. And it was a pretty straightforward formula that I'm wondering why the candidates this time are not trying to sort of emulate. One, it was like, he's just been there for too long. And it wasn't in a harsh, aggressive kind of, he's the worst governor in America. It was just like, the guy's been there for too long, which most people, even people who voted for Cuomo at that point, would have said, yeah, he's kind of been there for a long time. Right. Secondly, he picked an issue, and it was a social issue, but it was the death penalty. Right. And he said, I will restore the death penalty. And then there was an affiliated thing. I'm going to end tuition assistance for people in prison. It really upset him, and I guess a lot of New Yorkers, that you could be, in Sing Sing having committed a murder, and you could get tuition assistance and take classes and try and rehabilitate yourself. I actually covered some of these graduations, that this did go on. and he had an optimistic sort of presentation, and he also had an interesting kind of cross-cutting, sort of issue around the environment. Mm-hmm. He was clearly a conservationist. So, you added it all up, and that was enough to convince a lot of people. It's like, okay, it's time to move. It didn't hurt that 1994 was a huge wave election in favor of Republicans. So all of the stars lined up. But I'm looking at what they're doing this time. And, Cuomo, Pataki was not like an angry guy beating his chest and saying, we're going to have to throw this guy out. And I'm not sure that style is going to cut it this time.
I will say politics has changed dramatically since 1994, number one. Number two, what George Pataki had, he was a backbench assembly member who became a backbench state senator. So it does beg the question, how was he so successful? He had Al D'Amato, and he had Joe Mondello, and the Nassau County Republican machine that really propelled him forward. D'Amato, in particular, really wanted to unseat Mario Cuomo. Yes. They did not like each other. That is fair to say. But Pataki had a far stronger Republican Party at the time. And he was able to take advantage of that, and they were able to scale up and win statewide. This time around, though, the Republican Party, for all intents and purposes, really doesn't exist in the same way on a statewide
Ed Cox,
level.
the chairman, the day after Stefanik announced, sort of came out for her and said, I endorse her.
There isn't going to be a primary.
Yeah, there isn't going to be a primary. And then, that very day, I think Blakeman started putting out the messages not so fast.
Well, it's easier for them because, number one, they don't have that good of a fundraising apparatus at this point. So they like that Stefanik comes in with the ability to fundraise nationally. It's the same reason why they coalesced around Lee Zeldin in 22, because Zeldin was a good fundraiser. I mean, and that time, right, you had three other candidates, and Elise Stefanik was one of the maybes. But basically, the New York Republican Party is like, it's a lot easier for us. I mean, look at the city, the local races, right? I did a piece whenever it was last year, the year prior, on the assembly races, and it's like Republicans didn't even run candidates and it's like, what's going on with the Manhattan Republican Party, with the Queens Republican Party, and whatnot? And part of it is because they just don't have money, or they just are having a difficult period attracting.
The state has gotten bluer, and there are just fewer Republicans, many of them who moved to Florida, or people who would be inclined to vote Republican nowadays have left the state, or they've become independent.
Right. The social issue makes people, that's the other thing. People are independents. They're not signing up to be Republicans, but they might vote Republican. Like one of the, who was it? One of the Brooklyn assembly races. It was the most Asian. It's the most Asian district, and these are people that are not registered in either party, but they ended up voting for the Republican. So now you're tracking the trends with independents. Like it's crazy.
And you talk to some of the Republican operatives, and they'll say, "Look, Asian voters are certainly gettable. They will be persuaded to vote Republican. So, certain Latino voters are persuadable and can vote for a Republican on occasion." But they acknowledge that this is, again, going to be extraordinarily difficult to win statewide. That just can't be undersold.
It's amazing, because I always think of Ed Cox as Richard Nixon's son-in-law, which he was, and he was part of the Nixon White House. And Nixon himself was such an operator. You could drop Richard Nixon in the middle of Berkeley, and he'd be making trouble. He'd be winning votes. I mean, the guy just knew how to do politics, and sometimes it was ugly, and sometimes it was cruel, but it was successful more often than not. Ed Cox, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, it's like, no, you've got 123 billionaires in New York City alone.
Yeah, why are they not Republican
how are you
donors?
How are you not raising money? What's going on here? I don't get it.
A lot of those billionaires have business before the state and city governments, and do not want to alienate a lot of those Democratic elected officials. I mean, it does become kind of an invirtuous cycle after a while.
Exactly, right. Like you have the Partnership for New York City. It's headed by Kathy Wild. A guy from New Jersey is about to take over. New Jersey is a Democratic state. Again, you don't have the natural built-in Republican donors, because I think all business owners will agree this is not an easy spot to do business in.
No.
But they do have to talk to the governor and have an open line and try to mitigate the blows, which could be a convincing argument again if a Republican is able to make that. But I just don't know how you do that.
And you saw this in 2022. Ron Lauder was a fundraiser for, at least, or a donor for exclusively one super PAC that tried to unseat Kathy Hochul, and that was unsuccessful. He spent a good chunk of money this time around.
Lit a pile of money on fire.
Trying to stop Zohran Mamdani as well, and that was unsuccessful. So some of these guys, they're investors themselves. They don't want to throw good money after bad.
Sure. Yeah.
And at the end of the day, what's going to be easier? Try to elect a Republican or a conservative Democrat, or try to work with people who are currently in elected office?
I wrote a whole column about this, that they should start acting like investors. Like if they'd gotten to Zohran Mamdani before the DSA did, I'm sure he would have had a very interesting conversation with them. He's a very practical man. I mean, because they burned all this money after the fact, saying crime is going to go out of control. He's an anti-Semite. He's and what does he do? The very first thing he does is the very first appointment is Jessica Tisch, who's a billionaire, and the police commissioner, and Jewish.
I will
refuting all of their assumptions and kind of helping them waste their money.
I will tell you, I don't talk to a lot of billionaires. I don't really know many of them personally. I don't. I really don't. But I do get the sense that sometimes they're not the best at gaming out politics from time to time, and
look at Bill Ackman's
they will rely upon political operatives to tell them, "Hey, if you spend some money over there, then this outcome will occur."
True.
And they are looking, and it's just, quite frankly, they are sometimes very good at picking the next big financial thing, but not necessarily good at picking the next big political thing.
Right, which is why this is kind of separate but similar. But when I was working on the primary stuff and I was calling up the different Jewish sects, like the Satmars in Brooklyn, I had a really interesting conversation with one of them who said, I go, well, listen, like, does the Israel-Hamas conflict weigh in on, and this was when Mamdani couldn't figure out how to respond to the globalize the Intifada conversation. And this person goes, listen, we just want, Mamdani, Adams, we just want to be able to make a phone call.
That's right.
And get and talk to the person that needs to get something done. And I was like, business. Yeah. This is all these people want at the end of the day.
That's right. No, that's right. Final topic, the midterm elections. Are there any seats in New York that are likely to flip? Are there any that look, and we're assuming that the lines are not going to move. We can talk about that in a minute.
Right. I guess the Long Island ones, right? Swazi and Gillen, the Republicans are hoping that a Blakeman at the top of the ticket will be able to assist with ousting them, right? Laura Gillen won by a slim margin. Swazi won by a huge margin on primary night, but it wasn't a huge victory. I was at the Democratic Party. They were not thrilled, and he was their biggest win of the night.
Yeah, there's a seat in the upper Hudson Valley held by Josh Riley, a Democrat there. That is potentially on the Republicans' list as well. And then, of course, on the Democratic side, Dems are really eager to try to unseat Congressman Mike Lawler, who bowed out of running for governor at President Trump's behest, if you will.
Yeah. You mentioned that there are going to be localities that are going to be voting for the first time in November.
Right.
Is that going to significantly boost Republican turnout, do you think? Or upstate turnout,
that depends. We don't really know. We're going to have to we're seeing that political science experiment play out in real time this time around. I mean, I think the hope is in presidential years, Democrats who tend to turn out to vote in these presidential years will then help these down ballot races as a result, where Republicans usually do quite well in odd-numbered years. But we really don't know what this is going to look like until it actually happens.
Right. And then I guess finally, Governor Hochul talked about setting the stage for a mid-decade redrawing of all of New York's congressional districts. She meant to do this in time for 2028, so it wouldn't necessarily apply next year, but the machinery would start.
Yeah,
right?
The worst thing that could happen is that districts will become, that are already Republican held, will become more Republican. The Democratic held will become more Democrat, which just makes, an alarm, which will just make it, again, harder to have, it'll just mean that people will be in those seats forever, and they'll just be forever held by a Democrat, forever held by a Republican, and it'll just change maybe the competitiveness of these races.
So I just think it's really funny that about 10, 15 years ago or so, a big Democratic talking point was about an independent redistricting commission. We have to have independent redistricting in order to make things fair. And there was this calculus that, hey, if we draw fair lines, we're going to win because it's a blue state. That's what the Democrats were thinking.
Yeah.
And now the extremes, I'm sorry, both parties are doing it now. They are gerrymandering in red states and they're gerrymandering in blue states. And this is the front line of the kind of national cold civil war that we're in between Democrats and Republicans right now. And it's all about redistricting. It's all about making sure that a line is drawn this way or that way in order to game out winning the House of
Well, the Democrat, I don't know if Hochul had any choice, right? I mean, the Democratic base would have called for her head if she didn't get in on
Gavin
this,
Newsom
right?
was doing in California.
Yeah, that's right. California and other states are doing it. You know, Maryland and, you know, anybody who has a high Democratic party profile, even if you're not interested in running for higher office, you still got to get involved in that conversation.
It's a safer bet for her.
She was getting prodded also by House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries in order to do this. And there were a lot of conversations about trying to get it done sooner rather than later. There is an outstanding lawsuit in order to, it's almost a Hail Mary, in order to trigger another round of redistricting in New York before 2028 rolls around. I have not been covering it directly. It does seem like a bit of a long shot, but
it's
you never know.
performance. Yeah, a lot of this is performance too, right? I mean, Hakeem Jeffries and the Democratic colleagues in the legislature are regretful that they didn't try to gerrymander those lines a little bit more, because remember, the maps were thrown out and they had to be redrawn, and they probably ended up where they should have ended up at the end of the day.
It's really hard to draw a line that is one going to be like make a super Democratic seat without then harming a moderate Democrat seat.
Right. Like, look, the Josh Riley seat, the Mark Molinaro seat, which was Delgado, right? That's
sort of.
It's just, and you have these population concerns in upstate New York, but the way that seat is drawn, I mean, you have portions of the Hudson Valley and then Binghamton, two completely different areas.
Yes.
So I don't know. I think Hochul also, you know, speaking of how she's taking a page from the National Democrats book, every time, she's only been up for reelection once, but, you know, she always has this, like, idea that she needs to be looking at the National Democrats and how that impacts New York.
I think as a former member of Congress, I think she can't help it.
She can't help it. She can't help it.
Yes, you hit the nail on the head.
But but the problem is, then she might not be then specifically looking at what's happening here in New York.
We shall see. Well, we will be watching. Thank you both so much. This is going to be a very interesting year. We just finished one, or have almost finished one, and we're going to have a very busy one looking at both city and statewide stuff. Thanks for helping us understand it.
It's fun.
If you want to keep up with what's happening in New York politics and hear more conversations with the people shaping the future of New York and beyond, subscribe to our channel. And let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, elections, and issues that matter to you.